Nobody, the brand new action film starring Bob Odenkirk, just dropped. I had the chance to check it out in theaters last night. We're gonna review it right now. Let's do it. Nobody is written and produced by the same guys who did the John Wick movies. So if you're a fan of those movies, there is a really good chance that you're gonna love Nobody. And while it does have a lot of the same qualities and elements that the John Wick movies have, this film feels a little bit more grounded. To be totally honest, it feels kind of like an early draft of John Wick that maybe got rejected by the studios because it just wasn't big enough. Where John Wick is larger than life with all these huge set pieces and over-the-top action, this all takes place in kind of one city, one suburban neighborhood. It's not a globe-trotting adventure, but there's still plenty of great action. But the biggest appeal of this movie, at least for me, was Bob Odenkirk. Because where the John Wick movies star Keanu Reeves, who has been an action star for decades and decades, this stars Bob Odenkirk, who has never played an action star in his life. And so it's a very fresh take from an acting standpoint, I would say. You know, you think of all the Taken movies or the tons and tons of movies that Liam Neeson has been in, right? It's always these same types of characters, these same types of actors playing these roles. Bob Odenkirk does not fit that bill. He's a comedian, he's been in Better Call Saul, he's usually playing kind of a middle-aged dweeb. And so here he really gets to get out of his shell and do something completely different. He recently revealed in an interview that he's been training for this role since 2017, and it really shows that he's been putting in the work. Because when I say this thing is action-packed, I really mean it. The way that the action was shot just felt so visceral, it felt like you were in it. And so the juxtaposition of seeing this crazy action, all this violence by this middle-aged kind of dweeby dude who we're used to seeing in all these different roles just really worked for me. Spoiler alert here, I'm gonna get into some story details that if you haven't seen the film and you wanna go in totally fresh, totally surprised, just click the link below. I'm gonna leave time code down there so that you can jump ahead so you can check out my spoiler-free recommendation and rating at the end. One thing that I really liked about this film is that they kept hinting towards this bigger universe. We find out that Bob Odenkirk's character was once an assassin, or what they call an auditor, and there's just all these little hints and plantings towards this larger universe that we don't really get to see much of, but it just teases us enough that we wanna know more. And they did a really great job of showing, not telling. So we find out that there's this voice on this old school radio gadget that Bob Odenkirk's character listens to, and we keep hearing this voice over the radio. We don't know who it is, but you can tell that they have a past. But as they're talking, we see this photograph of Bob Odenkirk's character, his dad, and another boy in the picture, and we instantly know this guy that he's talking to is his little brother. There's many other examples in the film of that, where it's just so great that they don't have to spoon feed you the story, especially when there's not a ton of story in this film, right? It is really just action-packed. There's not a ton to chew on story-wise. And so I appreciated that the few story elements that were there were done tactfully. But honestly, we don't go to films like this for a really robust storytelling experience. We're there for the action. And like I said, this has so much of it. And what's really fun is Bob Odenkirk's character is not this action star who's just pummeling through a ton of people. He actually takes a ton of hits in this film. And where some other action movies with very, very similar plot lines will just have the action star steamroll through all of the villains, this film takes a little bit of a different approach, just in having Bob Odenkirk struggle through every little bit of it, and it's just his willpower that keeps him pushing through. One of my absolute favorite scenes in this movie, and this is actually the scene that I think anyone should go to this film just to see this scene, is the bus scene, where these drunk guys get on the bus, they're kind of harassing this girl, and Bob Odenkirk just decides to let loose, and it is just so fun to watch him go to town on these jerks. But this is one of those scenes where it is so violent that there were multiple times where I was cringing in my seat. Those of you who have seen the film know exactly what I'm talking about, where he basically breaks this dude's neck, paralyzes him, he's laying on the ground, he can't even breathe anymore, and he cuts a hole in his throat, sticks a straw into it so that he can breathe and continue living. That is just so gnarly. But because this film goes over the top, it's almost funny. It's almost like a Quentin Tarantino movie where it's so bloody that it's not even really gross at that point. It's more fun than anything. Another scene that I loved was where he's in his basement after having taken out all of these assassins, and he's talking to what seems like himself at first, telling this story about his past and who he really is. The camera turns and we see all of those assassins that he just fought just sprawled out all over the basement, bleeding out all over his couch, listening to this story as he tells them who he really is. The camera goes back to Bob Odenkirk as he continues to tell his story, and then he realizes, oh, all these guys are dead, I'm just talking to myself now. And then there's the fantastic oneer where we see the antagonist, this Russian kind of crime lord. For those of you who don't know what a oneer is, it's basically a really, really technical shot. They're super hard to pull off, where the camera starts rolling, we follow some action or a character, and the camera never cuts once throughout that sequence. Anytime you see a oner in a film, you just are fully immersed in that moment. You are there with the character or with whoever you're following, and they are just so hard to pull off because it takes so many people involved to make that shot work. So I applaud them, especially in this film, for doing a great oner with the antagonist. Now, I think the first two acts of this film are probably the strongest parts for me, because at those points in the story, Bob Odenkirk's character is still this middle-aged father. He's still this suburban man who just happens to have all these abilities that he's suppressed. But in the third act, it jumps the shark a little bit for me. We've been introduced to his father, who's this 80-year-old man in a nursing home, and there's a scene where he ends up shooting these guys who come to try and kill him. But as soon as the father gets up and he's with his two sons and they're just running around this warehouse killing all these guys, while it was super fun to watch and extremely entertaining, it just became less believable at that point than the story had been all the way up until then. This was the first movie that I've seen in theaters since COVID, really, so it's been the better part of a year since I've actually had the theater experience. But let me tell you, this was a great one to go back to the theater for, because the audience was just loving it. Anytime there was a crazy killing blow, the audience went wild. Anytime there was a great joke, the audience was laughing. It was just super fun to be back in the theater and see this wild, crazy action. And like I said, if you're a fan of the John Wick series, the odds are so high that you're gonna love this movie and really get a kick out of it, because it delivers on all of those fronts. I would rate this movie a 3 out of 5. Like I said, the story for me is lacking, but that's not really what you go to this movie for. I still think that it is a super fun watch, and while I'm not going to be rushing out to the theaters to see this again, or I'm probably not even going to buy it when it comes out, it's definitely a fun watch that I would recommend at least once to anyone, especially fans of the action genre. And they plant a bunch of plot lines and little elements that could be used in a great sequel. And if they ever do announce a sequel, I can guarantee that they've got my money already. I will be there to see the new action scenes, to see what they do with this great character that Bob Odenkirk plays, and to see how they evolve this universe that they've slowly started building. So while there's not a whole lot to chew on in terms of story depth, it is super fun. The action definitely delivers, and it is a great time at the movies. If you've seen the film, let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Are you excited to see more? Let me know. Please like and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you around.